I barely heard the judge when Ethan shoved the divorce papers across the table toward me. "Sign them," he said without even looking at me. "You walk away with nothing." My hands froze. The courtroom suddenly felt too small, too warm, too quiet. Ethan sat there like he already owned the outcome, which, judging by the expressions around me, he did. His attorneys looked relaxed, organized, confident. My lawyer looked exhausted. One of Ethan's lawyers opened a folder. The marital residence remained solely under Mr. Hale's ownership. The investment accounts, development properties, and business holdings are also excluded from division. I stared at him. Those projects were built while we were married. Ethan finally leaned back in his chair and looked at me with the same expression he used whenever he thought I was being naive. "You never understood the business side," he said calmly. "You supported me emotionally, that's different." I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Some of the people sitting behind Ethan used to eat dinner at our house. Some worked for him. A few had once called me family. None of them said a word. My lawyer leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Sandra, if we drag this out, he can bury you in legal fees for years." Years. I looked down at the papers in front of me, and memories kept crashing into my head faster than I could stop them. Leaving my design career because Ethan promised we were building something together. Wiring my mother's inheritance into his first development project when no bank would approve him. Sitting beside him through endless nights while he practiced investor presentations I helped write. Now he acted like I'd never mattered. "You should sign," Ethan said quietly. "You won't survive fighting me." A few minutes later, my signature was on every page. Just like that, I lost the house, the accounts, my car, even my ownership claim to the company I helped build. By the time I walked out of the courthouse, all I had left was one suitcase and a folder of legal documents tucked under my arm. Rain poured across the street while people rushed past me without looking twice. I tried calling a taxi, but my bank card declined the second I tried paying. The driver shook his head and pulled away. I stood there in the rain feeling completely numb when a man's voice behind me said, "If your husband hid what I think he hid, this isn't over." I turned and saw a middle-aged man standing a few feet away in a dark coat. My stomach tightened. "How do you know anything about my husband?" Instead of answering, he handed me a business card. There was no company name, no title, just a phone number. "You'll understand later," he said. Before I could stop him, he disappeared into the crowd outside the courthouse. I looked down at the card again. Then my heart stopped. Pressed faintly into the back corner was Ethan's company logo. The apartment smelled like dust and old paint. That was the first thing I noticed when I unlocked the door to the tiny room I could barely afford 3 weeks after the divorce. One window, a mattress on the floor, a folding table someone had left behind. I set my suitcase down beside the wall and just stood there in silence. 12 years with Ethan, and this was what I had left. Over the next month, things got worse faster than I expected. I sold jewelry first, then furniture I'd managed to keep in storage. Clients I used to work with suddenly stopped returning calls. One woman finally admitted why. "I'm sorry, Sandra," she whispered over the phone. "Ethan told people the divorce got messy." Messy? That was the word people used when they wanted to avoid saying ruined. I started realizing Ethan hadn't just wanted to leave me. He wanted me erased, financially, socially, professionally. Then Victor called. "The man from the courthouse," I asked carefully. "I have some bookkeeping work," he said. "Temporary consulting, remote." "I'm not an accountant." "You organized Ethan Hale's records for years. You know more than you think." I almost hung up, but my rent was due in 6 days. So I said yes. At first the work seemed ordinary. Spreadsheets, transaction histories, property transfers, but during our late-night calls, Victor kept asking specific questions about Ethan's companies. Did he ever move funds between projects unexpectedly? Who approved vendor payments? Did you notice missing reports? The questions started bothering me because I remembered things I hadn't thought about in years. Ethan handing me stacks of paperwork to sign without explanation, transfers labeled temporary adjustments, accounts that disappeared and reappeared months later. Then one night, while reviewing old records, I found something that made my stomach drop. A waterfront development Ethan and I had owned together had been sold 8 months before the divorce. But the money from the sale never appeared anywhere in the court filings. I immediately called Victor. "You already knew, didn't you?" I asked. There was a pause. "Part of it," he admitted. "Are you trying to use me against him?" "No," Victor said quietly. "I think he used both of us." I sat there staring at the screen while pieces started sliding together in my head. Ethan hadn't decided to destroy me during the divorce. He'd planned it long before he filed. Before I could ask another question, my email notification chimed. A legal notice. Filed by Ethan Hale Development Group. My chest tightened as I opened it. Ethan was suing me for violating a non-disclosure agreement connected to his company. I could barely breathe. Then Victor said something that made it worse. "If you fight him publicly, he'll know we found the missing accounts." A year after the divorce, I walked into the most expensive hotel ballroom in the city, wearing a black dress I almost couldn't convince myself to buy. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, while servers carried champagne through crowds of investors, politicians, and developers. At the center of it all stood Ethan, laughing, shaking hands, acting like nothing had happened. The giant screen behind him displayed the logo for the annual Hale Foundation Housing Gala. Reporters circled the room while cameras flashed every few seconds. Victor adjusted his cufflinks beside me. "You ready?" "No," I admitted. "Good, means you still think clearly." The second people noticed me, conversations started dying around the room. I heard whispers immediately. "That's Sandra. I thought she disappeared. Didn't Ethan say she was unstable after the divorce?" I kept walking anyway. Then Ethan saw me. For the first time in over a year, his smile disappeared. He crossed the ballroom toward me slowly, keeping his expression controlled for the cameras. "You should have stayed invisible," he said quietly once he reached me. I looked him straight in the eye. "You spent a lot of money trying to make that happen." His jaw tightened. Before he could answer, Victor stepped forward smoothly. "Ethan," he said, "I don't think you've met Sandra's business partners." That caught his attention immediately. 2 investors standing nearby shook my hand. One smiled. "Sandra's consulting firm helped us recover losses from 3 failed development contracts last quarter." Ethan looked confused for half a second. Then nervous. It was the first time I'd seen it happen. Over the past year, Victor had helped me rebuild from scratch. What started as bookkeeping turned into consulting work. Then investors started coming to me quietly after discovering inconsistencies inside Ethan's contracts. Some of Ethan's own former clients had moved their accounts to my company. And he hadn't realized how many. A reporter suddenly approached us. "Mr. Hale, can you comment on allegations involving missing funds tied to the Brighton housing project?" Ethan answered instantly. "Former employees mishandled that project. We've already addressed internal issues." Victor didn't react, he just watched Ethan carefully. That was when I realized tonight wasn't about charity. It was about pressure. Another investor stepped closer. "Then why are federal investigators reviewing offshore transfers connected to your company?" The room went quiet. Ethan looked at me immediately. "You're doing this because you're bitter," he snapped. "You couldn't handle losing." I felt every camera turn toward us. Then I said the one thing that made him go pale. "You already destroyed yourself, you just don't know it yet." People began stepping away from Ethan almost immediately. Donors excused themselves. Investors stopped answering calls vibrating in their pockets. The energy in the ballroom shifted so fast it almost felt physical. As Victor and I headed toward the exit, I grabbed his arm. "Tell me what's really happening." He finally looked at me directly. I'm a forensic accountant working with federal prosecutors, he said. We've been investigating Ethan for years. I stopped walking. What? Victor's expression stayed calm. The evidence that opens the entire case came from documents only you had access to. Before I could respond, gasps spread across the ballroom behind us. I turned. Federal agents were walking through the entrance doors, and Ethan was staring directly at them. By the next morning, Ethan's face was everywhere. News anchors stood outside his corporate headquarters, while federal agents carried boxes of documents through the lobby behind them. Financial analysts debated fraud allegations on television. Reporters called it one of the biggest real estate investigations in the state. I sat frozen in my office watching it unfold. Then my phone rang. Victor. They froze 6 accounts overnight, he said. More warrants are coming. I looked at the screen showing Ethan being rushed into a black SUV outside his office. This is really happening, I whispered. Yes, Victor said, and now you need to understand exactly what he did. That afternoon, he spread dozens of files across the conference table in my office. For the next 2 hours, my entire marriage unraveled in front of me. The paperwork Ethan used to hand me for routine approvals had actually transferred investor money through shell corporations connected to offshore accounts. My administrative credentials appeared on nearly everything. I felt sick. If my name is on those documents, I started. Victor cut in carefully. Ethan used you as protection. He assumed you'd never question the transactions. I stared at the files. All those nights Ethan would drop papers beside me while I worked. All the times he'd kiss my forehead and say, "Just sign these for me." He had been building an escape route for years. Then Victor showed me something worse. Construction reports. Budget cuts. Inspection delays. Housing developments abandoned halfway through completion because Ethan secretly drained project funds overseas. Families had invested savings into those properties. Some lost everything. I pushed the files away. How many people knew? More than you think, Victor answered. That was the moment I stopped worrying about protecting Ethan. A week later, I turned over every archived email, invoice, property file, and backup hard drive I still had from my years working beside him. The prosecutors connected the records directly to hidden accounts Ethan thought nobody could trace. 3 days before the criminal hearing, Ethan finally contacted me himself. Not through lawyers. Not through assistants. Him. Meet me, he said over the phone. Please. Please. I almost didn't recognize the word in his voice. We met in a courthouse hallway the morning of the hearing. Ethan looked nothing like the man from our divorce. His suit hung loose. Dark circles sat under his eyes. Even the way he stood looked smaller. You owe me after everything I built for us, he said quietly. I stared at him in disbelief. You built it on people you thought would stay powerless. His expression hardened instantly. Careful, Sandra, your name is still on documents too. Before I could answer, 2 court officers approached him. Mr. Hale, one said, it's time. They escorted him toward the courtroom doors. I followed a few steps behind. Then I stopped cold. Along the hallway wall sat rows of evidence boxes and seized asset files. And across multiple folders, stamped in bold black letters, was the name of my company. 5 years after Ethan told me I would walk away with nothing, I sat inside a packed criminal courtroom watching everything he built collapse in front of him. The room buzzed with reporters, attorneys, investors, and former business partners waiting for the hearing to begin. Cameras flashed every time Ethan shifted in his seat. But he still looked confident. Not arrogant like before, desperate confident, the kind of confidence people fake when they think one last hidden card might still save them. His attorney leaned toward him repeatedly, whispering updates. Ethan nodded every time like he still believed he could negotiate his way out. Then the prosecutors began presenting the financial records. One screen after another filled with evidence. Shell companies. Offshore transfers. fake development expenses, investor funds rerouted through hidden accounts. The courtroom grew quieter with every document that appeared. And then my name came up. The lead prosecutor faced the judge. The breakthrough in this investigation came from archived records preserved by Sandra following the divorce proceedings. Ethan turned toward me, so fast his chair scraped across the floor. For the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely shocked. Victor testified next. He explained how he had investigated Ethan's company for years, but could never access the internal transaction records needed to prove fraud. Ethan had protected himself carefully until the divorce. That was when Victor noticed inconsistencies in the settlement documents. Properties missing from disclosures. Transfers completed before asset declarations. Money disappearing before court filings. And because Ethan routinely used my credentials to process transactions, I unknowingly possessed backup records tied to almost every hidden account he created. Ethan had spent years treating me like I understood nothing. That mistake destroyed him. The prosecutor continued laying out evidence showing forged timestamps, manipulated authorizations, and testimony from former accountants who admitted Ethan ordered them to hide losses from investors. Then Ethan finally snapped. "She signed documents too," he shouted, pointing at me. "She knew about the transfers." The courtroom stirred immediately. But the prosecutor didn't even hesitate. "We have verified metadata proving multiple authorizations were altered after submission," she said, including access logs showing Mr. Hale used Mrs. Hale's credentials without her knowledge. Ethan's face changed right there. Not anger. Not frustration. Defeat. Like he finally understood there wasn't a way out anymore. Outside the courtroom afterward, reporters nearly crushed against the barricades trying to get statements. Former investors filed civil suits within hours. News channels replayed footage of federal agents seizing Ethan's properties all week. Even his own family publicly distanced themselves. Several former associates testified against him to reduce their own liability. Everything he once controlled started collapsing at once. And the biggest reversal of all came through the restitution agreements. The city transferred oversight contracts for several abandoned housing projects to my company. Ethical investors who once feared Ethan now partnered with me directly to rebuild the developments his fraud had destroyed. Even the mansion Ethan fought to keep during the divorce was eventually sold through liquidation proceedings. The same house he once told me I'd never touch again. When the hearing ended, I walked down the courthouse steps surrounded by attorneys, investors, and reporters asking for interviews. 5 years earlier, I had stood in almost the exact same spot holding one suitcase while my bank card declined in the rain. This time, microphones followed me instead. One reporter asked, "How did you rebuild after losing everything?" I paused before answering. Then I looked back at the courthouse doors behind me. "The day he took everything," I said, "was the day he stopped controlling my future." Months later, my company officially reopened the abandoned housing developments Ethan left behind. Families who lost money during his fraud received compensation through court settlements, and for the first time in years, those projects were finally completed safely. As for me, I bought a quiet home on the edge of the city. No shared accounts. No hidden signatures. No Ethans. Just a life that finally belonged to me. And in the end, the man who promised I'd leave with nothing sat in a courtroom, watching me walk away with everything he lost.